you have a blend of cultures. So, families are, still married or still have beliefs under one culture, religion, but there's other things that linger on from prior cultures, slavery times, and how we build families that mix together. And I think that's common in a lot of places. We just don't really talk about them because most people don't really understand it. So our traditional families, what we call traditional, the mainstream families, like two people get together, they go to the courthouse and they get married. Some people come from a culture where that's all they have. But a lot of people, it's usually something more gray, where they believe in going to the courthouse because that's what they do, but that's not really what they're doing. That's not really how they're building families. That's not really how they see relationships. That's not really how they see raising children. That's not really how they see romance. So people kind of follow one thing, but they're breaking the rules all the time. But they still have to find a way to live. And, people get older and they have assets and, they pass away or they have children or they break up. And there's just a lot of big questions there.
I'm Rachel Green, divorce mediator and collaborative attorney. Join me as I chat about everything from smoothly navigating your way through divorce to prenups, all the while keeping the kids in mind. Hi, I'm Rachel Green, and this is Keep the Kids in Mind, my podcast about families going through transitions. Today, I am very pleased to have as my guest Hayden Morgan, a family and divorce mediator based in Brooklyn, at ourfamilydecides.com. Hayden, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So nice to have you. So just to start, I'm wondering what has drawn you to this work? What has made you want to sit in a room with families who are going through transitions and changes and are having conflicts with each other that they can't resolve themselves and they want to come to a mediator?
I think at the core of it, what drew me to mediation probably started at a much younger age. My family is from the Caribbean, and when they came here, their relationship, they're still married. Their relationship, they know each other since they were children, but the way we were able to survive, not having a lot of money, was that my parents and their siblings worked together a lot to kind of make ends meet. And so basically, I grew up in a very large extended family, and that is kind of what started giving me the building blocks of understanding how to negotiate and how to the importance of maintaining relationships. So, I didn't realize at the time, but it became really important to me that how to speak and how to keep groups together was something that I used to survive as I entered adulthood.
That's so interesting. So because you had a large family and there were a lot of people around, it sounds like conflicts would come up, as they do between any two people, and certainly any 10 people. There are going to be conflicts. And you kind of saw dispute resolution in action to keep your family. It sounds like your family had the value of being close and helping each other. And so conflicts had to be resolved as they arose.
Right. I was raised with really strong egalitarian values. My family is from the Caribbean. We're from a very rural part of the Caribbean. But it's a lot of us. By having those kind of values, you kind of learn lessons without knowing what those lessons are. One of the biggest lessons is that relationships are the most valuable things that you do have, and that relationships will change, but they're not something you should throw away because they are something that you should covet. And that has made an impact in my life personally and professionally. I wish I understood those lessons in the beginning of my career. I probably would have not have chosen to be a litigator where uh, zero-sum games is a part of the job. But it is something that resonated with me, and the more I started practicing and the more I started litigating, I realized something was missing. So it kind of brought me back to thinking about getting into mediation.
That's really interesting. So you realize that relationships are valuable and they're worth working on.
Right.
And that's something that you saw with your extended family.
Right.
Um, and then you started out as a litigator.
Hmm.
And so, like, what kind of cases were you doing, and what kind of zero sum situations did you see? Because I think people are under, really misunderstand the litigation process, and they imagine that it's going to be like the wise father that they never had, who's going to listen
Right.
to them and say, "Oh, you put up with that person. It's terrible." Is that,
Right.
yeah.
I think when I first started practicing, I guess I started law a little bit older. Before then, I was in the service. I was in the military for a while, and then I started practicing law. And I think when I started practicing law, I started in insurance defense. So I represent insurance companies, um, which is always interesting because you're representing the guy who probably should have paid half the time, you know? And the goal is to, uh, fight for your client to pay as little as possible. And then I moved on to tenants' rights advocacy, which was better, but now you're working with the little guy who's fighting like the big guy. And you want to win in a way, but it's very hard because winning often means keeping your client maintaining their tenancy, keeping them in the apartment, but also too, winning means that the person that you beat is their landlord, right? And
Right. And they're going to have to still
yeah,
have
you're gonna
contact.
have to still have some kind of relationship with them. So that was always over time I was like, oh, this is kind of weird. Like if I really win, I'm gonna go home and they're gonna be with the person they just beat. And then now I'm moving more into I do employment law now, which is kind of the same dynamic, but I'm on the other side. I'm more on the plaintiff side. So, you know, to win means maybe the other side doesn't work for my client anymore, but then again, I don't always win. So I'm still now leaving behind like this fight where these people still have to maintain relationships. Throughout the course of my career, had started developing interest in mediation, but also family issues, uh, not just divorce, but kind of alternative family structures, uh, communal families, even polyamorous families, families that are being built in the United States and outside the United States, but maybe don't, we're kind of behind in the law, but people are still building them. And it kind of got me thinking, okay, well, what are these people doing? And what happens when they break up? What happens when they want to have kids? What happens when they decide to cohabitate? So I started kind of going down this rabbit hole of study on my own. And now I'm here. My interest definitely is akin to my background because even though my parents are what you would call traditionally married, I wouldn't say I was totally raised in a traditional way. Um,
Mhm.
it was more of a communal family structure, you know, coming from the Caribbean, um, a country that was basically under the control of a bigger, stronger country. You have a blend of cultures. So, families are, still married or still have beliefs under one culture or religion, but there's other things that linger on from prior cultures, slavery times, and how we build families that mix together. Um, and I think that's common in a lot of places. We just don't really talk about them because most people don't really understand it. So our traditional families, what we call traditional, the mainstream families, like two people get together, they go to the courthouse and they get married. Some people come from a culture where that's all they have. But a lot of people, it's usually something more gray, where they believe in going to the courthouse because that's what they do, but that's not really what they're doing. That's not really how they're building families. That's not really how they see relationships. That's not really how they see um, raising children. That's not really how they see romance. So people kind of follow one thing, but they're breaking the rules all the time. But they still have to find a way to live. And people get older and they have assets, and they pass away, or they have children, or they break up, and there's just a lot of big questions there. And I really became interested in that. So that's how I decided I wanted to move forward, practicing mediation.
So it sounds like you had like a lot of extended family around all the time, and so maybe it wasn't just your two parents who were raising you. Everybody chipped in to raise all the cousins and the children, and I guess if your aunt told you to do something, it had the same force as if one of your parents did.
Right. It had a very similar impact, right? So my aunts and my uncles, they're basically like pseudo parents. The things that you grow up saying, like, oh, my mom taught me this, my dad taught me this. Sometimes, yeah, that was the case. But I was have a lot of lessons that my uncles, my aunts, my much older cousins played these like really huge roles in my life. And I don't have children, but a lot of my cousins do, and I find myself playing these major roles in my
Quasi,
cousin's kid's life.
right,
You
quasi
know,
parental.
right. So that's how I understand it. Most of my cousins, they're traditionally married, but we're not working in the same structure. Like, we're traditional on paper, but there's so much other stuff going on. And then
Hmm.
I started realizing, this is not a vacuum. Other people are kind of living this way as well.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And then how has that like for have you worked with clients who are in also non-traditional family structures?
I've worked with a few. Um, I'm still relatively new to mediation and drawing in clients. I'm trying to tailor my practice to focus on that, because I get a lot of calls, people I know personally, they have all these questions. But a lot of time, persons who are, uh, in these kind of structures, I wouldn't say they're fearful of the law, but there's a general belief that the law doesn't cover the issues that concern them. A lot of them are either not from the United States, or their parents aren't from the United States. So they just think that they have to kind of wing it, and they don't think that there's anything they can do. So I'm at the stage where I'm kind of reaching out to people, or people are saying, oh, I hear you talking about these type of things. Like, what can I do? And I'm trying to kind of focus on that. But for the most part, I've kind of seen more of the
Yeah,
traditional family structures,
with
uh-huh. With
divorce and
with divorce. I mean,
yeah,
sometimes you hear things where it's like, okay, this is not 100% traditional, but they're not recognizing it as that, you know.
yeah,
A lot of times people who are doing things that are not exactly traditional, because of the biases, they are recognizing some of those feelings, or um, attitudes or actions, as either like some kind of violation of the rule, or something that's less than, so they don't really fully acknowledge it. But it's just a common thing. It's just, I'm pretty sure in 10, 20 years from now, people will be more understanding. It will be more accepted in the United States, because I do see more of it. But right now, it's not. It's just not something that's like really recognized. So people don't really come to the law, um, or come up with agreements and structures as they should.
and is it more recognized in some other places or other cultures?
Yes, it is more recognized in other cultures. Depends on the culture. Where my family is from, I would say it's in a way similar to the United States. It's not like recognized openly, but it's something that's so widespread that it is just happening too. Um, but in other cultures, yeah, it's definitely more understandable. And I think when you talk about alternative family structures, it's not just like what I went through, where you had a lot of cousins and uncles and aunts. It happens in the United States just in different ways. It could be something as simple as, let's say you're a single parent, and your your mother helped you raise your child. So it's almost as if your parent is also a parent to your child. then we have to ask bigger questions like, okay, you know, they're living together, but what if the actual parent moves away? Like, you know, should we have agreements on the grandparent being able to see the child? They've basically been in the child's life
Right.
the entire time.
Right. And
So,
for the child, it could be a huge loss to not have grandma
right.
in the house. Yeah.
Yeah. So it happens in many different ways. Just that people are just not putting names to it, you know? So it's where, it's everywhere. There's also uh platonic co-parenting is on the rise.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's another topic that I'm, interested in kind of getting into. And that can create a spider web of different scenarios because these people are coming together. They're 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 choosing to have children. They're having usually healthy co-parenting relationships, but they're not romantically involved. And these people will eventually maybe find romantic um, companions, and those companions may be involved in the child's life. So what now we have a bunch of different issues here, because they likely won't be married. So, you know, these things are just all over the place. And also sometimes these platonic parents, they do get married, but they're still not romantically involved. That's kind of a thing that's happening now too. I reached out, there's a company in Japan that they're almost like a service that helps people do friendship marriages
That's
where,
really fascinating.
yeah, they do friendship marriages where a lot of young Japanese people are marrying their friends, uh, their platonic friends, and they're having families and they're having kids, and that's like a new wave. But what happens when these people eventually find romantic partners? They're already married, so and then it's so many other issues and
Right. In some ways, not having a romantic partner leaves an emotional void in
right,
humans. I mean, we are driven in some ways to find partners. So there's always that, vulnerability, that chance that they will down the road fall in love with someone else.
right,
Um, or want to just have a sexual relationship with someone else.
right, yeah, and
Um,
yeah,
yeah.
and it, from what I have seen and what I've read and like listening to the experts, like this is all fine. This can lead to very healthy environments for the child, but it's very complicated depending on the country and the laws. Romance. You know, we have this kind of like magical kind of connotation to romance, but romance,
Disney.
and you're right, and intimacy
Right.
is also a health thing, right? Like, as we are human beings, we are part of a bigger organism, which is our society, and intimacy is one of the ways that helps us feel connected to our group. So it's something that is a need. It's a health thing, and when we don't have connection, it does affect our health. It affects our mindset, and it clearly can have an impact on other relationships, including the relationship with your child. The happier the parents are, the happier, that happiness can be given to,
Yeah.
their
Well,
children.
I've read that there are all kinds of challenges happening in Japan because there's a huge amount of pressure that's put on women, particularly as mothers. The culture is that they'll send the child to preschool, for example, with two different outfits as a change of clothes, so that if they do finger painting or go out to the playground and get dirty, that they have to have clean clothes to put on. And they don't use clothes dryers. It's just looked down on. It's thought it's much better if they hang their clothes to dry, so they get that lovely fresh air smell in their clothing. And so there's like a whole culture of difficult to reach standards that young women see their peers go through. And it requires, it's almost like how our culture was in the 1950s, like the super housewives and
Right.
keeping immaculate homes and, cooking everything from scratch and not using time saving technology. that would allow women to continue working when they become parents, so that there's been this backlash of young women who don't want to get married, and they're
Right.
having population drop. So it's interesting that then some other alternative relationships are starting to
Right.
crop, because the traditional roles are so constrained.
I guess circling back to like the friendship marriages, I think, that could be related because, you know, that if you're marrying your friend, or that's a different type of motivation to get you into these relationships, that might change the standards in which what the person's asking you for. And I think that happens here in the United States. If uh, meeting someone and you decide to have a kid with that person, based on platonic parenting, then the motivations are a little different than a traditional marriage where you meet someone, you date them, and then you fall in love, and then you meet their parents, and you do this, you do that. I think it puts you on a different relationship escalator, and therefore the demands and standards are different.
Right. Well, we do seem to have this, Disneyfication, Disneyfied vision of what romantic relationships are supposed to be, and that they're supposed to be your everything. I think that the
Right.
younger generation, though, is pulling away from that
I think
more,
so too.
realizing that like friendships are equally important.
Right.
I mean, there's
Right.
certainly studies that show that people who have friends just live longer, are healthier, have lower incidence of heart disease and some other diseases. And, it's very important. It nourishes our soul to
I
have
agree.
friendships, and that we need more than just our spouses.
Yeah. I think I agree with that. I think it's hitting some cultures faster than others. Um, I think it's hitting my culture slower than I'd like. I'm in my late 30s, uh, but I am studying things and I'm practicing things that I guess is considered a little bit more new age. But from my Caribbean background, they're still a little bit kind of much more traditional. They're much more behind. So I think
Um,
from culture to culture, it changes. I think Caribbean culture and you know they're still I still very much more traditional. I think they'll eventually catch up because that's how it always goes. But I've noticed this in my personal life. Like I'm saying things and they're just looking at me like, what are you talking? This is not how this works. I'm like, but it can work this way
it can
because
work
the
this way, right? It's
right,
like opening your mind in a whole different
yeah,
direction. Yeah.
right. So, but I feel good. I do notice younger people are asking bigger questions, and they're more aware of like what is important outside of just survival or fitting a mold of what happiness is. People are asking questions like what actually is happiness? Like how do I measure this for myself? And I
Yeah.
think with older generations, it was kind of like, well, happiness is when you get these things. I think with younger people, it's like, no, no, no. I need to actually know what it is so I can try to
Right.
accomplish
And
it.
finding it in yourself, I think, is more an ideal. I mean, my
Right,
my daughter, who's 24, recently went through a breakup, and I had some long talks with her about it. And I was kind of taken aback to hear her talking about how in her generation she feels like her friends are equally important as her
right,
romantic partnership, whereas when I was her age, I was very focused on who was I dating, and
right,
that was like my main, like I was just thinking, like I felt like one of my big tasks, not my only big task, but one of my big tasks in life was to find this person who I would, you know, form a pair bond with and have a life with. And that was more important than my friendships. Like
right,
I could ignore my friends if I was involved in a new romance. That was like
right,
completely accepted. Like, oh, we haven't seen Rachel for, 2 months because she's just dating this guy.
right, right.
And I think that for my daughter, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I am there. I've seen that myself. I think I'm in the same boat. I see that from my younger cousins who are that age. They're saying things that I was not saying.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's healthier. And I think when you look at people going through divorce who are older, um, the the disappointment uh, is very intense because that assumption that
They had higher
this
expectations that, like, this
right
would be the be all and end all.
right is kind of lost. And
Yeah,
um, I see it more in men than in women, like heterosexual men. Over time, some of them, they eventually kind of like they lose a lot of their friendships after a certain age.
yeah, that's so
And
true,
and then they're going through a divorce,
and it
and
feels
now
yep,
and they're like, I don't even know where to begin. I
right,
don't feel attached to anything
and they can
anymore.
become very yeah, very, disconnected, yeah. I
Right.
mean, if they have children, hopefully their children
Yeah, they have
stay in
kids,
touch with their
hopefully.
dads, right,
Right. But the kids, they're trying to live their own lives and make their own connections. And you have this adult father who they kind of gave up all the things that would be sustaining to them
right.
in their lives. And they didn't realize that that's what they were doing because they believed the way they were doing it was the way they were supposed to do it.
Right, and I think in my generation, there's, more of that the women tend to be I mean, certainly that was true of my parents. The women tend to be like the gatekeepers of the relationships
Right,
outside of outside of the home family. And then when there's a divorce, that's, the men feel don't know have those social skills because they've relied
right.
more on the women,
That's
in a heterosexual
That's
relationship,
exactly what it
right?
is. Those skills are lost, and it's a scary place to be. I mean, I haven't gone through that, but to be older and to try to do something as a heterosexual male, I struggle with that myself. Like making new friends is a incredible task. You know?
Yeah, I mean, that's hard for women too. I
Yeah.
think when you become an adult, you're meeting people maybe at work. I mean, the pandemic has not helped that
Oh
either
no, it's ruined it.
because so
Yeah,
many people are working remotely. They don't even know the people that it's
that's
harder.
true.
It's harder. It's not that it can't be done, but it's harder to form relationships with people through work even because you're only
Yeah.
seeing each other on Zoom.
Right.
Mhm. And yeah, it's a challenge in our society, people becoming isolated.
Yeah.
But, going back to keeping the kids in mind, which we've
Right.
we've strayed a little bit from that. But
Yes.
like, the example you gave before, I was just thinking about with let's say a mother and a grandmother living together
Right.
and with a child or children, and then the mother decides to move to another state and should there be an agreement between them about when the kids, and I mean, I think if you keep the kids in mind and what do they need? Like they
Exactly.
need the frequent contact with their
Right.
grandmother as well. So I think, yes, they need to
Right.
know what the structure is and when am I going to see her and, how can I call her and does she know how to do Zoom so that I
Oh
can
yeah.
talk to her
That's true.
when I want to and, and
Yeah.
I think like what they call the psychological parent is
Right.
is still there and children's needs haven't changed even if adults
Exactly.
relationships are changing. So do you have any examples that you've seen where people navigated that well or not so well or any advice you would give?
I did work a case that was similar to that. It was like a mother and a grandmother and a daughter, and the the mother finally got financially on her feet. She wanted to buy a home and move away, and the grandmother was kind of concerned that she wasn't going to see the daughter because basically she's been in the daughter's life the entire time because the mother had the child quite young.
Oh, so
So
they really lived with the
right,
grandmother taking care of both of them.
basically.
Yeah.
Um, and they figured it out. Um, they set up a scheduled time where the grandmother could come visit, and sometimes the granddaughter can go see the grandmother. Um, I they had a system they put in place. I think I believe I remember that case. I think I was shadowing that case. That was years ago. Uh, but I think it kind of started because there was a little bit of, I guess, conflict between the grandmother and the mother outside of the child. They were just having some issues. But it became clear over time that the mother recognized the importance of the grandmother being there as another parent, and that she did add something uh, to the child's development. So they came up with a system uh, where the grandmother could see the child regularly, and they seemed comfortable. They seemed
Yeah.
comfortable with that. Um,
And the mother recognized that
the
the child
mother rec the mother
needed to see
recognizes
the
that.
grandmother. Right.
So
Yeah.
right. So that was good. Um, that could have went not good, but it did go good in that way. I think advice or lessons that I learned in my personal life that kind of pushes me in certain directions that my parents taught me is that as long as you are an adult and you are in the presence of a child, then you are an adult to that child, right? Forget about the circumstances. Forget about whose kid is who and who got divorced and who married who and whatever drama that exists, because that always exists. That's like the air. What's always going to be true is that you are an adult and there's a child. And as long as you understand that dynamic, you can be an adult to that child and embody that, and take pride in that. And if you kind of see things that way, it's very easy. It becomes easier to negotiate certain things or to take perspective on certain things because all the adults kind of perceive themselves as being on the same team.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the goal should be.
Right. It's a unifying vision.
Yeah.
And did you find yourself in the role of mediator between various members of your extended family?
Sometimes um, uh, my family is, I'm going to say they're very vocal people. That's the way I'm going to word it. And they are very passionate. And sometimes you kind of need somebody to step in there to kind of be like, okay, um, you know, you're, s- when you're emotional, what's coming out your mouth may not be what you're saying in a way. And
Ah, interesting.
you know, come from like very passionate people. My mom is particularly passionate person. Um, I'm the oldest of three uh, siblings, and when your mom is um, that person, and that's the first person you get to know, you get to understand what she's saying, even if she's not using the right words.
Ah, strong
And
personality, and you have to interpret what she means.
yeah, and it also usually, at least for me, it kind of makes you a more calmer person because you realize, like, okay, if two of us are doing the same thing, we're not going to be able to accomplish these tasks. And it's kind of worked for me
Yeah. Are your
because
siblings also come, or are any of them?
my middle brother and my mom is basically the same person. They're
Yeah.
just they're basically the same person. So those two are always having uh, conflict or disputes because they communicate the same way. And
Yeah.
you'll notice that persons who struggle with communication skills, they try to supplement that by adding emotion to their conversations because they think it's going to make it more effective. It usually doesn't work, but because they don't realize that the communication skills is what needs to be worked on, they just add more oomph
Yeah.
to what they're saying as if it's going to just steamroll the fact that no one understands what you're saying. So
Raising their voices.
yeah, I'm kind of accustomed to that. So myself, my younger brother, and my father, we're much more on the calmer side because we realize like, okay, we can't all be doing this,
Yeah.
and it's effective.
Yeah.
My,
Must help you. That experience must really help with your mediation clients because you're seeing all these like unspoken dynamics. It's
right,
very interesting that people aren't always saying what they mean.
right.
I think that's a great principle to
That
keep in
you
mind.
have to really keep that in mind,
Yeah.
and but it's good. It does feel good to be in that position um, because you can when you help someone kind of clarify what they're saying and they hear for the first time specifically what they mean, you can see the relief in the person.
Yeah, that they're being understood because they're
Yes.
frustrated themselves, not finding the
Right.
words for it. Yeah, well, that's
Yeah.
great. Well, Hayden, it's been a pleasure having you as my guest. I feel like we could talk for another hour. Maybe you'll come back at some point for part 2.
Yeah, that sounds
But
nice.
I also love the name of your website, Our Family Decides,
Thank you.
because that's so much a principle of mediation and so different than what happens in the courts. And I definitely welcome you into our mediation community where we're
Thank you.
trying to help empower families to make the decisions for themselves because they know their values, they know their histories, they know what they need going forward. They're in the best position to make these decisions. So
Thank you.
it's a great website name.
Thank you.
And thanks so much for coming on. Keep
No
the kids
problem.
in mind.
Thank you. I will.